The humming was the worst part. Not loud, not sharp, just a low vibration buried deep inside the walls that never stopped. It crawled through the floor, up through the metal bunk, and settled somewhere behind Danny Reeves' teeth. 11 days of it. 11 days in a holding cell on a prison moon called Reth Nuller, and he still could not get used to that sound. He was not supposed to be here. His cargo ship had been carrying licensed medical supplies to a colony outpost when a Galori border patrol pulled him over a checkpoint. The scan officer said the cargo was flagged. Danny showed them his permits. The officer did not care. Galori border officers had quotas, and a lone human hauler with no political connections was easy paperwork. So here he sat, waiting for a trial that Pell said would never come. Pell was his cellmate. A small amphibian creature from a species called the Medesi, barely reaching Danny's chest, with damp greenish skin and wide nervous eyes that never seemed to blink at the right time. Pell had been on Reth Nuller for 3 cycles, which translated to roughly 4 Earth years. He had learned to survive by being invisible, and he was very good at it. That on Danny's first night, Pell had whispered 2 rules. Never look the guards in the eyes, and never, under any circumstances, volunteer for the Crucible. Danny had asked what the Crucible was. Pell had gone pale, which for a Medesi meant turning almost white, and told him everything. Deep beneath the prison, buried in the rock of the moon itself, the Galori had built a maze. Not a simple maze with fixed walls and a single path. The Crucible was alive, or close to it. Its corridors shifted on a timed cycle. Walls moved, paths opened and closed. The layout changed constantly, reconfiguring itself over and over, and no 2 moments inside it were the same. Any prisoner could volunteer to enter. The rules were simple. You had 6 hours. If you reached the center chamber, you went free. Full pardon, immediate release, no exceptions. It was Galori LW in 400 cycles. No one had ever reached the center. Pell said hundreds had tried. Mathematicians, engineers, military commanders, scientists from species that had conquered star systems. All of them had failed. Most came out shattered, unable to speak or think clearly for days. Some never came out at all. The maze swallowed them, and the Galori did not bother to retrieve the bodies. Danny had listened to all of this quietly and asked only one question. Was there a screen that showed the inside of the maze? Pell had pointed to the yard, where a large display was mounted on the far wall. The Galori broadcast every Crucible attempt live across their entire territory. It was entertainment to them, a spectacle. They loved watching prisoners fail. Over the next few days, Danny fell into the prison routine. Wake up, eat the tasteless nutrient paste, sit in the yard, avoid the guards, go back to the cell, sleep, repeat. But every moment he could, he sat near the display screen and watched. During his first week, a prisoner volunteered for the Crucible. A tall creature from a species Danny did not recognize, with thick armored plates and 4 heavy legs. The prisoner entered the maze with confidence, moving fast, reacting to every wall shift with sharp turns and quick decisions that IT did not matter. For hours in, the prisoner was trapped in a corridor that closed from both ends. The Galori guards pulled it out, barely conscious, trembling. Danny watched the whole thing. He did not watch the prisoner. He watched the walls that he started counting. Every time a wall shifted, he tapped his finger against his knee. 1, 2, 3. He tracked the intervals. He watched which corridors opened and which ones closed. He noted the timing, the rhythm, the sequence. Nobody paid attention to him. He was just a human sitting quietly in the yard, tapping his fingers. The other prisoners were too busy surviving to notice. The guards did not care what a freight hauler did with his time. That'd be why the end of the second week. Danny had watched 3 more Crucible attempts. Each time, he sat in the same spot, counting, tapping, watching. At night, he lay on his bunk and replayed the patterns in his head, the same way he used to replay freight routes back on Earth. That was what he had done for 15 years. Logistics. Moving cargo across 6 continents through shifting weather, changing road conditions, seasonal closures, and real-time disruptions. Every single day, the map was different. Every single day, he had to find a path through a system that refused to stay still. On the 14th night, Pell noticed that Danny was staring at the ceiling with a strange expression. "What are you thinking about?" Pell asked. Danny was quiet for a moment. "The walls shift every 47 seconds, he said. But inside that, there are smaller shifts. Shorter cycles running underneath the main one, like gears inside a clock." Pell sat up slowly. "What does that mean?" "It means the maze is not random," Danny said. "The Gallery built it on a pattern. A complicated one, layered deep, but still a pattern. And if it has a pattern, it has a rhythm. And if it has a rhythm, you can time it." Pell stared at him. The color drained from his face again. "Danny," he whispered, "please tell me you are not thinking what I think you are thinking." Danny did not answer. He just closed his eyes and kept counting. 47, 12, 8.3 numbers. Danny carried them everywhere now, tapping them against his leg when he walked, mouthing them silently when he ate, running them through his head as he lay awake at night. They were the heartbeat of the crucible, the base cycle, the mid-cycle, and the microcycle. 3 gears turning inside each other, driving every wall shift, every corridor change, every opening and closing inside the maze that he had figured out the first number within a week. The second took another 5 days. The third had only clicked into place last night, after watching a 6th crucible attempt and catching a tiny wall movement that everyone else had missed. Now he needed to test his theory. And for that, he needed to keep watching. The problem was that crucible attempts did not happen every day. Prisoners volunteered when they were desperate enough, which meant Danny sometimes waited days between chances to observe. During those gaps, he studied what he already had, scratching small marks onto the underside of his bunk with a stylus that Pell had smuggled from the maintenance corridor. Pell did not like any of this. He brought Danny the stylus because Danny asked, and Pell was physically unable to say no to anyone, but he made his feelings clear through a constant stream of worried looks and quiet sighs that sounded like a leaking pipe. That IT was Rana, who changed everything. Rana was a Tez sock, a reptilian species built like a wall. She stood 2 heads taller than Danny, covered in dark green scales, with thick arms and claws that could punch through sheet metal. She had been on Reth Nuller for longer than Pell and spoke less than anyone in the cell block. Most prisoners avoided her. Danny had noticed her watching the crucible screen with the same stillness that he did, and one afternoon she walked over and sat down beside him. "You are counting the shifts," she said. It was not a question. Danny looked at her. "You noticed. I've been here a long time. I noticed things." She paused. "You are not the first to try to find pattern, but you're the first who has not given up after a week." Danny asked her what she knew about the maze. Rana was quiet for a moment, and then she told him about the dead ring. Deep inside the crucible, past the outer corridors and the middle passages, there is a circular section where the shift speed doubled. Walls moved every 12 seconds instead of every 47. The pattern layered on top of itself, creating a spinning trap that no prisoner had ever navigated. Rana said she had known a Tez-Sock soldier, one of the strongest and smartest people she had ever met, who had made it to the dead ring. He came out 3 hours later, unable to remember his own name. Danny asked her to describe the dead ring in detail. How wide were the corridors? How many branches? Which direction did the shifts seem to move? Rana answered each question carefully, pulling from memories she clearly wished she did not have. When she finished, Danny was quiet for a long time. "The dead ring is not a separate system," he finally said. "It is the same pattern, just compressed. The same gears, turning faster. If I can time the outer maze, I can time the ring. I just need to adjust the count." Rana studied him with her dark yellow eyes. "You really believe you can solve it?" "I believe the maze is a machine," Danny said. "And I've spent my whole life reading machines." That night, he told Pell about his plan. not to volunteer. Not yet. Just the plan. Pell reacted the way Danny expected, which was badly. He paced the tiny cell, his damp skin turning pale, and then flushing dark green, and then going pale again, cycling through colors that Danny guessed meant various levels of panic. You cannot, Pell said. You will die in there. Danny sat on his bunk and let Pell wear himself out. When the little Medesi finally stopped pacing and stood there shaking, Danny spoke. Pell, on Earth, humans solve mazes for fun. We put them in books for children. We draw them on paper and race each other to finish them. We build giant ones out of corn plants and walk through them on weekends for entertainment. Mazes are not traps to us. They are games. Pell blinked. Your species does this willingly. We pay money to do it. Pell sat down on the floor, which was something he did when information overwhelmed him. Danny gave him a moment and then continued. The Galori built the Crucible to be unsolvable because they think in straight lines. They designed the shifts to be too fast and too complex for any mind to track. But they made a mistake. They assumed every species processes chaos the same way. Humans do not. We grew up in chaos. Our entire planet is chaos. Weather, traffic, economies, ecosystems. We learned to find patterns in the noise because our survival depended on it. Pell looked up at him. And if you were wrong? If there is no pattern, there is always a pattern, Danny said. Sometimes it is just buried deeper than people are willing to dig. The next morning, Danny watched his 7th Crucible attempt. A thin, insect-like alien from a species he did not know. It lasted 2 hours before getting trapped in the middle passages. Danny tracked every shift, confirmed every count, and added 3 new data points to his model. That evening, he closed his eyes and ran the entire maze in his head. Base cycle, 47 seconds. Mid-cycle, 12. Microcycle, 8. The gears turned smoothly. The paths opened and closed in his mind like a living map. He was ready. The line at the warden's office was not really a line. It was more of a slow, reluctant shuffle of prisoners waiting to file complaints that would never be read, request transfers that would never be approved, or ask questions that would never be answered. Danny stood at the back and waited his turn. When he reached the front, Warden Solora looked down at him from behind a raised desk. She was Galori, tall and angular, with a hard exoskeleton the color of wet stone and compound eyes that reflected Danny's face back at him in dozens of tiny copies. Her mandibles clicked once, which Danny had learned meant mild irritation. State your request, she said. I volunteer for the Crucible. The clicking stopped. Solora studied him for a long moment, her compound eyes shifting in a way that might have been surprise or amusement or both. You understand that no prisoner has completed the Crucible in 400 cycles. I understand. You understand that participation is voluntary and that injury or death inside the maze releases the Galori Dominion from all responsibility. I understand. Solora processed the request. Danny noticed her mandibles twitch twice more, which he suspected was the Galori version of smirk. She stamped his file and told him the attempt would be scheduled for 2 days from now. Standard preparation period. Word moved through the cell block faster than Danny expected. By the time he returned from the warden's office, half the prisoners already knew. Rana found him in the yard within the hour. So you actually did it, she said, standing over him with her arms crossed. I did. You are either the bravest creature I have met or the most foolish. She sat down beside him, her weight making the bench groan. Tell me your plan. All of it. Danny walked her through his model. The 3-layered cycle. The timing of each gear. The predicted path through the outer corridors and middle passages based on the shift patterns he had tracked over 3 weeks. He explained how the dead ring was not a separate system, but a compressed version of the same pattern, running at a faster rate. Rana listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a while. There is something else you should know, she said. The maze does not just move walls. It attacks your senses. Inside, the lights change color and intensity to confuse your depth perception. Sounds bounce off the walls in ways that make you think corridors are longer or shorter than they are. And the temperature shifts, hot in one passage, freezing in the next. It is designed to break your concentration. I know, Danny said. I have watched enough attempts to see how it affects people. They start making mistakes when the sensory disruptions hit. They lose their count, and you think you will not. Danny thought about this honestly. I think I've spent 15 years doing my job in situations where everything around me was trying to break my focus. Storms, traffic jams, equipment failures, angry clients screaming through the radio. I learned a long time ago to hold my count no matter what was happening around me. Rana nodded slowly. She did not smile. Tessix rarely did, but something in her expression shifted. Danny thought it might be respect. That night was difficult. Pell did not speak to him for hours, sitting in the corner of their cell with his knees pulled up to his chest, cycling through shades of green and white. Finally, close to midnight, he broke the silence. I have watched 19 prisoners enter the crucible since I arrived here, Pell said, his voice barely above a whisper. 11 came out unable to walk on their own, for had to be carried. 2 never came out. The other 2 could walk, but they were not the same people anymore. Something inside them was broken. Danny sat on the floor across from him. I know, Pell. You are my friend, Pell said, and the word came out cracked and unsteady. I do not have many of those. I do not want to watch you on that screen and see you break. Danny reached out and put his hand on Pell's shoulder. The Medesi flinched at first, then settled. I'm going to tell you something about humans, Danny said. We're not the strongest species out there. We're not the fastest or the smartest. But we have one thing that I do not think the Galori accounted for when they built that maze. We are stubborn. When a human decides that something can be solved, we do not stop until we solve it or until we physically cannot continue. And even then, sometimes we keep going. Pell looked at him with those wide, unblinking eyes. That does not sound like a survival trait. It is the only reason we survived at all. 3 floors above them, in the security wing, Overseer Dravik received the notification that a human had volunteered. He pulled up Danny's file on his console and read through it. Species, human. Homeworld, Earth. Occupation, Fret Logistics Coordinator. No military background. No scientific training. No notable physical enhancements. Dravik closed the file and leaned back. He had designed the current version of the Crucible himself 12 cycles ago, adding the dead ring and upgrading the sensory disruption system. Since his redesign, no prisoner had made it past the middle passages. A freight hauler. Dravik almost felt insulted. He opened a communication channel and ordered the broadcast networks to prepare full coverage. Maximum distribution. Every Galori world, every station, every outpost. He wanted the Dominion to watch this human stumble through his creation and fail that IT would be over in an hour, Dravik thought. Maybe less that he was wrong. The door was heavier than he expected. Not physically. It slid open on its own, but the weight of it was something Danny felt in his chest as he stepped through and heard it seal shut behind him. The sound it made was final. A deep, metallic thud that said very clearly, "You are inside now." The corridor stretched ahead of him, lit by a cold blue glow that came from strips embedded in the walls. The air smelled like metal and something faintly chemical like cleaning fluid left out too long. And underneath everything, that hum, the same vibration he had felt in his cell for weeks, except louder now, closer, alive in the floor beneath his boots. Danny took a breath. Then he started counting point 1, 2, 3 that he walked forward at a steady pace. Not fast, not slow. Measured. Each step timed to his count. Each breath drawn in rhythm. The corridor was wide enough for 2 people to walk side by side, with smooth gray walls that curved slightly at the top like the T-47. The wall shifted. The corridor behind him closed. A new passage opened to his left. Danny turned into it without breaking stride. He had expected this. He had watched it happen dozens of times on the screen, but feeling it was different. The sound of the walls moving was a low, grinding rumble, like stone dragging over stone, and the floor vibrated hard enough to travel up through his legs. He kept counting. The maze began its assault on his senses within the first 10 minutes. The blue light shifted to a deep red, turning the corridor into something that looked like the inside of a wound. Danny ignored it. His count did not depend on what he could see. It depended on what he could feel. The vibration in the floor changed slightly before each shift, a tiny pulse, barely noticeable unless you were paying attention. Danny was paying attention. 30 minutes in, the sound distortion started. Echoes bounced from directions that made no sense. A scraping sound behind him that was actually coming from the left. A low boom that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Danny's instincts told him to stop, to look around, to react. He did not. He counted. He moved in the monitoring room 3 floors above. Warden Solora stood behind a row of technicians and watched the humans' progress on a holographic display. The display showed the maze layout from above, with Danny's position marked as a small white dot. Most prisoners moved erratically, darting left and right, backtracking, freezing. The white dot moved in smooth, deliberate lines. It turned at precise moments, pausing only at junctions, and then moving again with clear purpose. Solora called Overseer Dravik. 1 hour in. Danny reached the middle passages. The corridors here were narrower, and the shift timing was different. The base cycle stayed at 47 seconds, but the mid-cycle became more active. More walls moved during each shift. More options opened and closed simultaneously. Danny paused at a junction. He counted through 2 full cycles, watching the walls move around him, confirming his model. Everything matched. The gears were turning exactly as he had predicted. He adjusted his path and moved deeper. 2 hours. He was further in than any prisoner had reached in the last 50 cycles. The monitoring room had gone silent. Every technician was watching the display. Solora had not spoken in 20 minutes. Dravik arrived and stood beside her, his compound eyes fixed on the white that as it moved steadily inward. He is navigating by timing, Solora said quietly. He knows when the shifts are coming. Dravik said nothing. His mandibles were locked shut. Back in the cell block, Pell and Rana sat in front of the display screen with every other prisoner in Block 9. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The screen showed Danny walking through a corridor that was shifting around him, walls grinding closed behind him, new paths opening ahead, and the human did not flinch. He did not hesitate. He walked through the chaos like he was strolling through a park. 3 hours. Danny felt the fatigue building in his legs, but his count was solid. The maze had thrown everything at him. Blinding white light that forced his eyes shut. Sudden drops in temperature that made his fingers numb. A sound like screaming metal that lasted for 30 seconds straight. None of it touched his count. 47, 12, 8. The gears turned in his mind, steady as a clock. 3 hours and 22 minutes. The corridor widened and curved. Danny felt the air change. It was warmer here, and the hum in the walls had shifted pitch higher faster. He knew what this meant. The dead ring. He stopped at the entrance and looked down the curving corridor. It stretched away from him in both directions, forming a circle. The walls here were different, smoother, and he could already see them moving. Faster than the outer maze. Much faster. Walls slid and reformed every 12 seconds, opening and closing passages along the ring at a speed that would make most minds freeze. Danny stood still. He breathed. He began layering his count. 47 for the base, 12 for the ring, 8 for the micro shifts. 3 rhythms, 3 gears, all turning at once inside his head. He let them sink. He let the pattern settle into his body the way a song settles in a muscle memory. In the monitoring room, Dravik leaned forward. This was where it ended. This was where they all broke. The dead ring was his masterpiece, a trap so fast and so layered that no organic brain could track it. Danny stepped into the dead ring and kept counting. Step. Pause. Step. Turn. Wait. Step. Danny moved through the dead ring like a man walking between raindrops. The wall slammed shut behind him with enough force to crush bone. New passages opened for a handful of seconds before sealing again. The corridor curved ahead of him, and every 12 seconds the entire ring shifted, rearranging itself into a new configuration that would have been impossible to navigate by sight alone. Danny was not navigating by sight. He was navigating by rhythm. 47, 12, 8. The three cycles layered over each other in his mind, each one ticking forward at its own speed, each one telling him exactly when to move and when to stop. His body followed the count. Step on the beat. Turn on the downbeat. Pause for the rest. It was not thinking anymore. It was something closer to music that in the monitoring room. The silence had turned into something thick and suffocating. 14 technicians sat at their stations, and not one of them was looking at their instruments. They were all watching the main display, where a small white moved through the dead ring in smooth, curving lines, slipping through gaps that existed for only seconds at a time. Warden Solora had not moved in 20 minutes. Her compound eyes tracked the dot with an intensity that made the nearest technician lean slightly away from her. Overseer Dravik stood behind them all, rigid as a pillar. His mandibles opened and closed without making sound. He had designed the dead ring to be the end of every attempt. No organic mind could track 3 overlapping shift cycles simultaneously while under sensory assault. He had proven this with mathematics. He had proven this with 400 cycles of data. And now a human freight hauler was walking through his proof like it was a hallway. Denny felt it at the halfway point. A break in the rhythm. Something moved that should not have moved. A wall shifting out of sequence, closing a passage that his model said should be open for another 4 seconds. He stopped. His count stuttered. The 4th cycle that he had missed it. Buried underneath the 3 cycles he had tracked, there was a 4th, a slow rotation, happening every 200 seconds, that shifted the entire orientation of the dead ring by 1/8. It was subtle. From the outside, watching on a screen, it would have been invisible. But standing inside the ring, feeling the floor shift beneath him, Danny caught it, his heart rate spiked. For the first time since entering the maze, he felt the cold edge of fear press against his chest. He was standing in the most dangerous part of the crucible with an incomplete model. The walls moved around him. 12 seconds. The ring shifted. He had maybe 40 seconds before his current position became a dead end. Danny closed his eyes as he thought about the hurricane. 6 years ago, a Category 4 storm had shifted course 3 times in a single day while Danny was coordinating 400 trucks across the eastern seaboard. Every 12 minutes, new weather data came in and the map changed. Routes closed. Bridges flooded. Highways became rivers. His team had panicked. Danny had not. He had stood in front of his screen, absorbed the new data, recalculated every route, and sent updated instructions before the next data pulse arrived. He had done this for 14 hours straight without sitting down. He found the pattern then. He found it now 0.200 seconds. 1/8 rotation. 4th gear. Danny recalculated his entire model, standing perfectly still in a corridor that was shrinking around him. He layered the 4th cycle over the other 3. 47, 12, 8, 200. 4 gears now, turning inside each other, and he held them all in his head at once. He opened his eyes. He moved in cell block 9. Rana was gripping the edge of her bench, so hard that her claws had punched through the metal surface. Beside her, Pell had stopped breathing. On the screen, the human had frozen for almost 30 seconds, standing in the middle of the dead ring while walls moved around him like the jaws of some enormous machine. Then he started moving again, faster this time, more precise. As if the pause had not been a failure, but an adjustment. He found something, Rena said, her voice barely audible. He found something new in there, and he adapted. Pell made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a prayer. Danny pushed through the second half of the dead ring, with 4 rhythms running in his mind. It was the hardest thing he had ever done. Harder than the hurricane. Harder than the time he rerouted an entire supply chain during an earthquake in real time. Every muscle in his body was tense. Sweat ran down his face and neck. The sensory disruptions were at full force now. Lights strobing, sounds crashing, temperatures swinging wildly, but the count held. The gears turned at T 4 hours and 31 minutes. Danny stepped out of the dead ring. The corridor beyond it was straight and wide and silent. The walls here did not move. The lights were steady white, and at the far end, maybe 200 meters away, Danny could see a soft golden glow. The center. He stopped. He caught his breath. He wiped the sweat from his eyes with the back of his hand and looked down the corridor that no prisoner had ever seen. Then he checked his count. 4 hours and 31 minutes used. 1 hour and 29 minutes remaining. Plenty of time. Danny Reeves, freight hauler from Earth, started walking toward the light. The center chamber was smaller than Danny expected. A round room, maybe 10 meters across, with smooth walls that did not hum or shift or move. After hours inside a machine that never stopped grinding, the stillness felt almost holy. A single pedestal stood in the middle, waist high, with a flat sensor pad on top that glowed a faint blue. Danny walked to the pedestal. He placed his hand on the pad. A tone sounded. Deep and clear and resonant, like a bell struck once in a cathedral. It traveled through the floor, up through the walls, and out through the entire structure of the crucible. For the first time in 400 cycles, the machinery stopped. The hum died. The walls locked in place. The maze went silent. 3 floors above. Every screen in the monitoring room flashed the same 2 words. Crucible complete. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 14 technicians sat frozen at their stations, staring at displays that showed something none of them had been trained to handle. Warden Solora stood behind them with her compound eyes wide, her mandibles hanging slightly open, processing a reality that contradicted 4 centuries of data. Overseer Dravik had not moved at all. He stood like a statue carved from dark stone, his eyes fixed on the main display where the white that sat perfectly still in the center of his creation. His creation. The thing he had spent cycles building, refining, perfecting. The thing he had proven mathematically absolutely could not be solved at IN cell block 9. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then it broke. Every prisoner in the block erupted at once, shouting, banging on walls, grabbing each other. Species that had never spoken to one another were suddenly embracing. A pair of Grellians lifted a small Medesi onto their shoulders and paraded through the corridor. The noise was deafening, joyous, uncontrollable. Pell was weeping. Not quietly, not with dignity. He sat on the floor in front of the display screen, with tears streaming down his pale green face, making sounds that were half laughter and half sobs. Rana stood beside him, perfectly still, watching the screen with a slow smile spreading across her scarred face. It was the first time anyone in the block had ever seen her smile. Commissioner Yeth was summoned within the hour. She was the highest-ranking Galori authority on Reth Nuller, a tall, silver-shelled official with a reputation for cold efficiency. She reviewed the footage personally. 3 times. She watched the human enter the maze, move through the outer corridors, navigate the middle passages, and walk through the dead ring as if it were a garden path. She watched him stop, recalculate, and adapt to a 4th cycle that even Dravik had not considered significant enough to mention in his reports. Then she called Dravik in her office and asked him to explain how a human cargo driver had solved an unsolvable maze. Dravik had no answer. He stood in front of her desk and said nothing, his mandibles clicking rapidly in a pattern that meant deep distress. Yeth dismissed him and ordered Danny brought to her office. Danny arrived still sweating, still wearing the plain gray prison clothes, still looking exactly like what he was, an ordinary man who drove trucks for a living. Yeth studied him from behind her desk with an expression that Danny could not read. "How did you do it?" she asked. Danny thought about how to explain it. He decided on the simplest version. "The maze is a machine," he said. "Machines run on patterns. I watched it long enough to learn the pattern. Then I walked through it the same way I would plan a delivery route. Count the intervals. Predict the changes. Move on the beat. You make it sound simple. It was not simple, but it was not impossible either. The crucible was designed to overwhelm. Fast shift, sensory disruption, overlapping cycles. It assumes that if you throw enough chaos at a mind, the mind will break. But humans are built for chaos. Our whole planet is chaos. We have been finding patterns in it since before we could write." Yeth was silent for a long time. "You are free," she said finally. "The law is clear. You solved the crucible. Your charges are dropped, and you'll be given passage to any system you choose." Danny nodded. He started to stand, but Yeth was not finished. The broadcast was watched by over 2 billion citizens across Galactic space, she said. They watched a species they had never heard of walk through our greatest achievement as if it were a children's puzzle. "Do you understand what that means?" Danny sat back down. "I imagine it means some people are going to have questions about humans." "Questions?" Yeth repeated. "Yes, many questions. The Galori Dominion has always operated on the belief that organic minds are predictable and limited. We built the crucible to prove it. And now, a freight hauler from a small planet in an unremarkable system has proven us wrong in front of the entire Dominion." She paused. "That changes things, Danny Reeves." Danny collected his belongings from the processing office. His jacket, his data pad, his worn leather wallet with a photo of his dog back home. He was escorted to a shuttle bay, where a small transport was waiting. Pell was there. He had been allowed out of the block for 5 minutes to say goodbye. He grabbed Danny's hand with both of his small damp ones and held on. "How did you stay calm in there?" Pell asked. Danny looked back toward the prison, toward the moon that held a maze that had swallowed hundreds of minds before his. "Every maze has a solution, Pell. You just have to be patient enough to find it." He boarded the shuttle, settled into the pilot's seat, and pulled up his freight schedule on the console. 3 weeks behind on deliveries. The maze had been interesting, but he had work to do as the shuttle lifted off from Rethnuller. The broadcast of his run was already being replayed across Galori space. Analysts were studying his movement patterns. Military academies were requesting the footage for training purposes. Government committees were forming to discuss a single question that nobody in the Dominion had thought to ask before today. What else can humans do?